Hello everyone, my name is Justin Clancy, and today I'll be presenting on the theoretical model of behavior change. I've designed this infograph to represent the multiple stages of the theoretical model of behavior change in relation to an individual trying to quit smoking. While the amount of stages may differ depending on the source you are viewing, the concepts are always the same. Starting at the top of the infograph is the initial stage or the pre-contemplation stage. In this case, the individual is either unaware or oblivious to their current behavior that is causing harm to their body and their health. Upon realizing their behavior may be causing harm to their health, they may enter the contemplation stage. This is where the individual begins to realize they may in fact be causing harm to themselves and it might be worth it to change their current habits. In this model exemplified in the slide, an individual may enter a determination stage, also known as a preparation stage. Here, the individual may come to terms with their reality and begin to prep for a life-changing decision. At this time, they would transition to stage 4, the action stage, in which the individual may begin to take steps towards their behavior change, but may not officially stabilize in the transition process. Lastly, we have stage 5 and stage 6, consisting of maintenance, in which the individual has achieved their goal and has consistently subsided from their habit, as well as a relapse stage. Depending on what model you are looking at, these stages may be interchangeable. As a brief history overview, the Transtheoretical model was first discovered and developed in the 1980s by James Prochaska and Carlo Di Clemente. From that point on, there were several breakthroughs over the last few decades. In the 1990s, they were able to demonstrate tailored interventions for smoking cessation that was effective even when more than 80% of their study population was not ready to quit. In the early 2000s, they were able to demonstrate the theory was effective simultaneously for multiple behavior changes. And lastly, as of our most recent decade, they were able to design a cost-effective delivery for coaching and online programs, a huge plus in today's technologically advanced society. Prochaska identifies several core constructs that make up the Transtheoretical model. He divides the constructs up by stages of change, processes of change, decisional balance, and self-efficacy. Pictured here is an example of the stages of change that we initially went over in the beginning of the presentation. Being that each construct represents a stage in the theory, it's fair to assume each stage represents a primary construct of the theoretical model. As for the secondary constructs, briefly looking over the tables, we can see the majority of the constructs identified represent the mental aspect of the theory, as well as actions that can be conducive towards subsiding from the negative behavior. Some of the mental battles of the journey of change would include dramatic relief, self-reevaluation, counter-conditioning, stimulus control, weighing the pros and the cons, as well as the confidence and temptation aspect. Action constructs that can help positively reinforce the behavior change would include creating relationships and using social support for the healthy behavior change, reinforcement management involving self-rewards for the positive behavior change, as well as consciousness raising in which the individual educates themselves on new facts, ideas, and tips that support the healthy behavior change. It is these examples that all play a role in the interchangeable stages that make up the Transtheoretical model. If appropriately applied, the individual has a higher chance of the final maintenance stage, while on the contrary, if negatively applied, has a higher chance of relapse. In an example of the application of the Transtheoretical model, in 2016, Yusufov and colleagues implemented the Transtheoretical model on using sun protection over a 2-year period. Their motivation for the study was to address skin cancer, which is one of the most common forms of cancer and is associated with numerous consequences. The goal of the study was to establish effective sun protective practices through the application of the Transtheoretical model. In this study, the pre-contemplation stage consisted of individuals who did not use sun protection. The contemplation stage consisted of individuals who planned on using sun protection within 12 months. The preparation stage consisted of individuals who planned on using sun protection within the next 30 days. The action stage consisted of individuals who frequently used sun protection throughout the study, while the maintenance stage reflected individuals who consistently used sun protection throughout the course of the study from when they first started. And lastly, the relapse stage consisted of individuals who eventually reverted back to not using sun protection. In another interesting example, Amazaki applies the Transtheoretical model to the use of sports mouthguards in Japanese sports. It was found participants with oral injuries in sports, such as rugby, lacrosse, motorbike sports, and boxing, were not currently using mouthguards. It was theorized that by increasing the frequency of the use of mouthguards, it would decrease overall oral injuries in sports, as well as reduce anxiety about injuries. The stages are pretty self-explanatory, starting with pre-contemplation stage of an individual not using a mouthguard, to using a mouthguard, and either eventually consistent using a mouthguard, or eventually reverting back to no mouthguard. The conclusion of this study was found that there is a necessity of intervention programs to promote the use of mouthguard and promote self-efficacy and the perceived benefits of mouthguard use. It was also determined the Transtheoretical model was useful for determining the stages of mouthguard use behavior among Japanese athletes that were originally not required to use a mouthguard. Overall, the Transtheoretical model has proven to be extremely flexible in its uses for changing and addressing a wide variety of behaviors. There have been multiple studies, such as the prior two examples, that have proven the model has had an effective purpose. On multiple occasions, it has been able to determine behavior changes as well as having clear evidence of positive impacts on a study population, as well as being able to draw several conclusions from a given study. On the contrary, there are cons to this theory model, as well as limitations. First and foremost, this model ignores social context such as socioeconomic status and income. An example where this can come into play can include something along the lines of a study population aiming to change their dietary habits but do not have the resources to consistently afford high-priced healthy food options. The model also tends to have an arbitrary line between stages with no set criteria. This also ties in with no true established period of time for each stage, which can be tough to measure within a study that is limited to time constraints. Lastly, the model assumes the individual makes coherent and logical plans in their decision-making process, which is quite frankly often not the case and will most likely result in the individual to interchange stages more frequently than predicted. Thank you for your time. Please see the references used throughout this presentation.